Hello and welcome to another Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. I'm super excited about my guest today, but I'm just going to use up the first sort of 30 seconds or a minute to talk to you about something else. I'm super excited, but not as excited about my guest. I'm more excited about my guest, but I'm still pretty excited that I've got a brand new book out this last week. And indeed, the ebook version of this came out today. This is Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, assessing the impact of discovering extraterrestrial intelligence on religion and theology. I wrote that, co-authored it with Dr. Aaron Adair. We are super proud of this. It's got loads of really great plaudits and endorsements, and just really would love for people to read it and see what they think. If they don't like it, just forget you've ever experienced that. And if you do like it, don't forget to put a review on Amazon. And also feel free to buy like 1,000 copies. You don't even need to read one of them, just buy 1,000 and that's great. Anyway, that's my spam out the way. I'm now going to get on to the reason we are here today together. You, I, and my guest. This is Stacie, apostasy. Stacie, very clever word. Welcome to the channel. Really pleased to
Thank
have you here. We had a few technical hitches at the beginning, but you can now hear me, so that's good.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I don't know
That's
what.
okay. No worries at all. To get the ball rolling, just give us a brief description, or not, any brief introduction of who you are, kind of like right now, where you are now, what you're doing, and then we'll delve back into your past.
Sure. So I'm Stacie. My online name at the moment is Apostasy. It's a play on the word apostasy.
Genius. I
Thank
see
you.
that. It's good.
Yes. And as you can imagine, I am an apostate from evangelical Christianity. I was born in a Christian home, raised as a Christian, and I defected about 2 years ago. And I did not plan on becoming a person who spoke online about this practically every week, couple times a week, but that's just the way life has taken me. And I absolutely love, love, love it. And getting to meet incredible people like yourself and Aaron Adair. I could go on and on about the people that I've gotten to meet through leaving religion and the friendships that I've made. It's been worth it. So,
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
are you where are you living at the moment?
I am living in British Columbia, Canada. I live in the Okanagan, which is the desert of Canada. It's absolutely gorgeous. So if you look it up, we are actually in wine country. I see you're drinking wine, and
This is true.
yeah, it's a little early for me. It's 1:43 in the afternoon, but I'm
Well,
surrounded by
it's past
wineries.
midday. It's definitely past
I
midday, so
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, I would love to be drinking a glass of wine right now, but
it's all right. I'll take your share. It's
yeah,
fine.
thank you.
It's the least I can do. So right, we are going to then transport ourselves back to the early part of your life. So you've gone through this deconversion experience. You've been on a journey. That journey is continuing. Tell us
Mhm.
something about your sort of family upbringing and how that influenced where you ended up being and what you believed in the early part of your sort of adolescence and adulthood, I guess.
So, as far as what I believed, I was a Bible believing Christian literalist. I believe the Bible was infallible, inspired by God, just written by men. I believed every word was true. Um, I didn't I didn't think there were any errors in it. I believed it was factual, historical. I believed in the 7-day creation or 6-day creation, I guess. We lived on a 6,000-year-old earth. I believed it all because I wanted to just be a very good Christian. I wanted to honor God in everything that I did. And I just I took the Bible at its word, um, and I wanted to
Is that
just
because your sorry, is that because your
yeah.
parents took it as their word? Is that because of the community you were in?
I think mostly because I was ta I was just raised in it from the time I was born, and it was mostly the community that I was in. I know we're gonna get into why we're here because my mom and I deconverted together, so I don't wanna jump ahead too far, but, yeah, the churches that we attended were all very much promoting that ideology, so I believed it, and I really didn't have any reason to question it as a young child because you were told, you're supposed to have the faith of a child. And so I wanted to just be a very good, obedient Christian. And I believed that Bible verse that said, um, I wanted to get to heaven and I wanted to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I didn't want to hear, depart from me. I never knew you. So I wanted to be very faithful and,
As a child, were you introduced to
yeah.
notions of hell? Because I know you've spoken
Mhm.
previously, from what I've heard of you speak previously, that hell
Yes.
was quite an interesting and important component of your belief. Was that
Mhm.
something that you were aware of early doors?
Yeah, I was made aware of it. I don't necessarily remember, like, a moment of being told about it. It was just something that I just remember always knowing about. Um, so I knew I didn't wanna go there. I didn't wanna be separated from my family. It was scary thinking about the possibility of hell, so I just knew, well, I'm gonna accept Jesus, so I'm not gonna be going to hell. I was very assured that I was gonna be going to heaven. I never questioned that, um, process, but I remember being shown a video when I was about 5 years old. There was a Christian singer, kind of he he was a singer, but he also told, like, theatrical songs. His name was Carmen. He was very popular in the '80s and early '90s, and he had a music video called "Revival in the Land," and it was, a music video of Satan talking to one of his demons, and it took place in hell, and my grandma
Love it.
showed it to me when I was 5 years old, so I got this picture in my head of what the devil and his demons and what hell looked like, and it terrified me. So, I did have a picture in my mind of hell and Satan, and I just knew, "Okay, I don't wanna go there." And then I guess I always had this fear of if I ever did walk away from the faith, okay, that's where I would end up going because you hear of the lake of fire, you hear of eternal conscious torment, and I just thought, "Well, I don't ever want to gamble my salvation, so I'm just not even gonna tempt faith." I played Oh, that's funny. I played God in a Carmen sketch. Which one? Because he had so many songs. Yeah, so I did have a picture in my head of what, hell looked like, and I just knew I didn't wanna be there.
Yeah, because there's this element of that being quite corrosive to perhaps an adolescent or a childhood, sorry, and then an
Mhm,
adolescence. This idea that you are being threatened with the worst thing in human conception. I mean, there is nothing worse in human conception than hell, because otherwise that
mhm.
would be hell, right? And so
Yeah,
therefore that threat is just huge. And for the people who are believing that literally, and it becomes an all-consuming kind of idea, and it's one that I imagine you take around with you every day, everywhere you go. You're always considering, well, I'm doing this because I want to get into heaven and I want to avoid hell, and these kind of twin bribes that sit on your
yeah.
shoulder kind of informing everything you do on a daily basis.
Exactly, and also, um, they the Bible talks about the unforgivable sin is blaspheming the Holy Spirit, and it doesn't,
Yeah, it's not
like
like murdering 600 children or something like that. It's like
yeah, and it's not super clear exactly that is, and with it saying it's unforgivable. So it's, to me it was always like, okay, well, how can that be unforgivable? What if you think you've blasphemed, but then, oh God, please forgive me, I think I blasphemed. And then, so you're kind of like, you don't want to even take any chances of blaspheming. So you're not always sure what that could be, so you don't wanna sometimes even question, because what if questioning is blaspheming the Holy Spirit, right? So, because it's not clear, you're kind of, you kinda just stay within this bubble or this, like, safety net in your, not really safety, but you know what I mean, like,
Yeah.
you don't venture out, with questioning, so
Well, then that's something actually I was going to come on to. I won't go into that yet, which is,
mhm,
questioning and your propensity to question a little bit. But you saw yourself as an evangelical, a Pentecostal, I believe. What's I mean, for I come from the UK, right, which is
mhm,
most people. It's only quite recently that there's a more evangelical brand of Christianity kicking about. But when I was growing up, it was like if you're religious, you are like you're max like Church of England, like go to church on a Sunday, sing a dirge, mumble about, and then that's your belief. Or if you're Catholic, you do pretty much the same, but there's a lot more ritual, and you get people wearing funny stuff at the
mhm.
front a lot more, and all that kind of stuff. And it's all kind of yeah. But then, you see Christianity in America has all these different flavors, and
Mhm.
evangelicalism is very kind of un-British, or at least it used to be. I mean, now it's quite different. What defines an evangelical? How would you see yourself as an evangelical and someone else not? How did you ever think about this? Is this, I don't know.
Well, I use that term now just because it's quite broad, but when someone would ask me when I was a Christian, "Oh, what denomination are you?" I would say, "Oh, I'm non-denominational." And I thought, how I don't have a denomination. I'm so much better. I'm a born again Christian.
Hey man, I'm not a member of a cult. Honestly,
Yeah,
I don't know,
exactly.
this ain't no
Exa
cult. I'm free and
yeah,
easy.
yeah, but I mean, even non-denominational is like a denomination of its own, because we would go to churches that they were its own flavor. Non-denominational is like, you go to any non-denominational church just because they're not part of the Baptist or the Methodist or, any of those. They're their own type of denomination, because
Yeah,
they kind of borrow from, I'd say, mostly the Pentecostal, because any non-denominational church that I attended, we all spoke in tongues. We all They all laid hands on people, like you'd go up for prayer. People would be falling out in the Holy Spirit, being slain in the Spirit. Um, People would be giving prophecies. The services would be lasting hours and hours and hours. There would just be,
really.
oh yeah, there would be singing in the spirit. So people would just start singing their own songs, usually speaking in tongues, singing. So it would just be very
So what,
strange.
all at once, like I'm both speaking
Yeah,
tongues and singing nonsense, and I'm
exactly.
singing my own song, and someone else is singing their own song.
Yeah, so they would
God,
just
that must have
say,
been awful.
it was very strange. So they would just be like, "Everyone just start singing your heavenly songs, just start crying out to the Lord," and people would put their hands up, and it would just be, you'd hear
Okay,
all
well,
different.
take me back to that because I'm interested. Like, as you look back now, have you
Mhm.
kind of analysed what you would have been thinking at the time? Like at the time, I'm interested. Okay, I'm interested in whether what you were believing at the time, whether you thought you had genuine experiences, and then if
Mhm.
you did or didn't, how you see it now.
At the time, to me, it was very, that was church. That was very normal, even though it was like inside, there were times where I did feel uncomfortable, but when I did feel uncomfortable, I would think, I would be apologizing to God, saying, "I'm sorry, I feel uncomfortable right now. Please forgive me. I know that this is worship. I know that I shouldn't be feeling uncomfortable." So those natural feelings of like, this is very strange, I would then chastise myself for feeling
Yeah,
uncomfortable.
but how about the actual feeling of, being in touch with God or having an experience, a spiritual experience? Like, did you
Mhm.
did you feel that at all
Oh,
genuinely?
yeah. Yeah, I would. Um, I would the music really gets you into that trance. Like, I can 100% say that the music really, really does work your brain into that frenzy, and the repetitiveness of it, you
I've
do
Yeah,
get
I've
the
talked about
goosebumps.
this. Yeah, wow. Sorry, I know I'm
It's okay.
interrupting. I've
That's
I've
okay.
talked about this with several guests before, about whether there's um, a meaningful manipulation of people's psychology with things like music and what they're saying and the way that they are manipulating people, physically around the place
Mhm,
and hands and all this. Whether there's a kind of knowledge that yeah, I'm using all these things so that I'm generating a feeling, or whether that's
mhm.
just part of what they do, and and they get people having these experiences. But yeah, there's so much involved in that, which is your baggage you're bringing to this, your expectations you're bringing to this.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The expectations, and they would also say to you, "Come expecting." So they would if there was a
That's
meeting, they
fascinating.
would say like, if there was a meeting the next night or in a couple of days, like, say they had a guest preacher coming, they would say, come expecting the Lord to move, come expecting his presence to be here." So they were already, like, preparing you and getting you to prepare for the Lord to show up and something to happen.
That's prime, which is priming you. That
Yeah,
this is all, wow, fascinating.
exactly.
So when you look back on that, I mean, you obviously felt that, I don't know, the Holy touched by the Holy Spirit or whatever
Mhm.
it would have been. When you look back on it now, do you see that as being psychologically duped? I mean, how do you understand it now?
Well, I think I mean, when I was touched by the Holy Spirit, it was when it was a time in my life where things at home, we wanted to be away. My mom was in a marriage that was not very healthy. Our home life was not very healthy. So we wanted to be away from it. And so church kind of provided that escape. And so we just wanted to not be at home. We wanted to be at church as often as we could. So it was like, okay, well, here's our out. And we were happy there, even though it was a very strange church. Um, and so yeah, that was a church that had the most bizarre activities that took place. So
Let us into that world then. What's the most bizarre
Ah,
activity, if
so
you feel comfortable
yeah,
saying
no,
that?
I can die. Yeah. So that one I would kind of sit back. That's the church where I'd be like, okay, I'm really sorry, God, that I feel like sometimes this is weird. But people, there was like some people there, like when the spirit would kind of like, please know that I don't actually believe this anymore. But when like the spirit would be moving, um, people would start clucking like chickens and like just making really weird sounds. And there would be like uncontrollable laughter, and so there'd be times where, like, you would just be like, I would be sitting there and I would be looking around and I would think, "How come this like, if this is all real, how come it's not happening to me?" Like, I'd be like, "Oh, well, I" like, especially the laughter part, like, I'd be like, "Oh, I'd love to be laughing right now," but I would just be sitting there, like, watching like an observer, um,
Wow.
and I would just be like, "Okay, like, how come this isn't" "Oh, hi, Crystal." Um I would be like, how come this isn't happening for me? Like, how come this is all around me, but I'm just watching?" So what I
Did
would
that make you feel, sorry, I've interrupted
That's
you again.
okay.
Did that make you feel like you really wanted to have an experience and then push that experience and then have an experience, but maybe it's not genuine?
Well, I just wanted to know that it was actually real because it was always happening to the same people again and again and again, and it was always the same people, and it never happened to me. Um, the only thing
Oh,
that would happen so I'm okay with it now,
poor
but
Stacie. This
no,
has scarred you,
I'm
hasn't it? Like,
totally okay with
I
it
want
now.
to be part of the crowd. This
I
is it. I
just
just want to fit in.
I wanted to know if it was actually real.
Yeah.
Um, so the only thing that I thought was real is they would always have altar calls, and, I would go up for prayer because I struggle I talk about this all the Yes, that is a great podcast. Great podcast. The church that I am talking about, this all happened around the time of the Toronto blessing. So, yes.
Yeah. For those that are
When
listening, the Daniel Moore says, I'd recommend
Oh, sorry.
The Heaven Bent podcast for a deep dive into the Toronto blessing experiences. Yeah, sorry, I just saw it throw it
That's
out.
okay. I listened to that podcast when I was still a Christian, and I ended up messaging Tara Jean Stevens, who's the person who did the podcast, because she actually is from where I lived, and we had so many similarities in our upbringing. It's like she was writing my life story, and just listen to the podcast. It's incredible. Um, yeah, it's so good, and I was like, that was around the time right before I began deconverting. Her podcast actually really helped in my deconversion too. So listen to that podcast. It's mind-blowing. But,
Yeah, so
where
you were
was
talking
I?
about you're talking about having those, experiences, but
Yeah,
feeling like it wasn't happening to you.
right. So I've talked about this a lot, online, but I've dealt with mental health. How could you not? In these settings and situations, but I've dealt with anxiety my entire life, and so I used to always go up for prayer, at church and always just pray like, "Okay, I needed my mind to just calm down. I needed my mind to just be at peace." And so whenever I would go out for prayer, they always like touch you on the forehead, but they don't just like gently touch you. They like push you, right? Because they
Yeah,
want you to fall down.
yeah.
So
And you're
that would
like,
be
come
yeah.
on, try it. Come on.
Yeah.
If
But
God
that
really exists, you can push
yeah,
me over.
exactly. But that would be the one place where I would feel like, okay, God, like I would just be so wanting something that I would think, "Okay, this is where God is gonna speak to me, or this is where God will minister to me," and I would just kind of give into that feeling or activity, and I was young, I was 14, 15, and I would fall down even though I was fully aware of everything. Um, if
So
you don't
you're aware you're playing a role there, then that you
Yeah.
are fulfilling other people's expectations.
Exactly, because if you don't, you kind of feel silly. Like, I'm being 100% honest. Like, I'm also looking back in
Mm,
retrospect.
mm,
You do kind of feel silly if you don't fall, and sometimes they really will push you, and you can sometimes see people, like, staggering their feet
mm.
back until they are pushed, or if you don't fall, then they'll just move on to the next person.
And this is why I
Um,
wonder whether the people doing that, the pastors or whoever it is that's doing that, is actually, do they really believe what they're doing? Like, if they're like, right, I need to push this person quite hard, then it's like they're not really having an experience. I'm literally pushing them. Maybe that
yeah.
really hard push helps them have an experience. Like, really?
Yeah. Maybe, but that was definitely the one thing that happened to me, but again, I was fully aware. I was not overtaken. I did not lose consciousness or anything because after you fall and you're laying there, you're fully aware, and I remember thinking, "How long do I lay here?" And have I laid here long enough to look spiritual enough?
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow. So
um, yeah.
that's I'm really interested in this idea, uh, and we're going to get on to why what part questioning plays in your deconversion. Because I was listening to you on Atheologica the the other day speaking about
Mm.
the similar sort of stuff, and you say you would have these questions about, well, that seems ridiculous. Like, someone living in a whale for 3 days. I mean, that's nuts. Like, does that really happen? So
Mhm.
but a lot of people don't have that. So what is it about you then where you're like questioning things that other people may not question? But then, and I was wondering, just as you're speaking, then you were talking about sort of mental health issues and anxiety, and I'm thinking, was your brain, psyche, whatever, this being one, were you, as someone who has was dealing with anxiety, more likely to struggle with some of these scenarios where someone else maybe wouldn't? In other words, is your anxiety actually an important component of your deconstruction?
Hmm. It might be because
Welcome to
it's
my psychotherapy.
yeah. Yeah. Um, well, you're not like I was not encouraged by the church getting any kind of like antidepressants or
Mm,
therapy is not encouraged. If you do go for prayer, it's always um, read your Bible more, pray more. It's always put on you. Getting any kind of help outside of God is frowned upon, and you feel a lot of shame. But once I did get medication in my 30s, uh, it helped. And I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? So, um, it, yeah, I realized this is not a spiritual thing at all. This is a chemical thing. And I wish I would have got help.
yeah, and
So,
I just wondering about, if you're the sort
yeah.
of person that has anxiety, is always
Hmm.
worrying maybe about what other people think. I don't know how they manifested and what they're like. So
Hmm.
correct me if I'm completely bastardizing your experiences.
It's okay.
But if you're the sort of person that worries about what other people think, or what, you're lying on the ground going, Am
Oh,
I here for
right.
long enough? Is
Yeah.
this then you're the sort of person that's going to struggle to just be in that moment, go with the flow
Hmm.
maybe a little bit more, because there's all this stuff going on. And then
Hmm.
that leads to maybe a little bit of doubt. That leads to
Yeah.
like, well, if I'm, it seems like I'm manufacturing this experience. Therefore, is this experience real? Are these people going through that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Well, as far as just the doubts, I would push them away. I think I mean a lot of people seem to do
Mm,
that too,
mm.
because you. I mean, I dealt with a lot of just feeling guilty all the time, just in general, about everything. I think
You
I
sure you
don't
weren't
know.
Catholic?
Yeah. No, but I really did, and, so even just certain thoughts would just pop in my head, and I would feel guilty for just a random thought. So even if I felt like maybe this isn't real, I would feel guilty for that, and, I wouldn't go any further into well, why would I think this isn't real, you know? So if you're referencing the Jonah and the whale, that kinda started to come up later in my in my 30s when I would start to hear that being talked about in the Sunday services, and I was
So
just like,
hear
"Are
that
we?"
talked about by other adults who believe
Yeah,
really?
and I was like, I remember thinking, "Are we really supposed to believe that?" Like, is that actually something we're supposed to believe? Because that just seems ridiculous, and because it is,
Yeah,
but
but I'm interested in why you're the sort of
yeah.
person who would find that implausible. Like I do, and that's why I'm not. That's why I'm not a Christian, right? Well, it's not the whole reason. There's an awful lot of reasons, but
Yeah.
there are an awful lot of people who they've got enough to just overcome that implausibility, and
Mhm.
then it just becomes normal. It's part of your baggage, and maybe as you've learnt it as a kid, you've learnt it before your mind is able to differentiate between plausible and implausible, like the Noah's
Mhm.
Ark, animals on the ark, and all that kind of stuff. You're like, if you were told that as an adult from scratch, maybe
Yeah.
from another religion, you'd be like, well, that's obviously nonsense. But because
Yeah.
you've brought it with you through your development as a child, it kind of bypasses that.
Well, okay, so to be honest, my husband, he was not really raised a Christian. He was his stepmom, she was Christian, and they would go to church, like, kinda on and off, and he wasn't really raised with any kind of belief, like, he was kinda like, "Yeah, it's kind of a neat idea if there's a heaven or an afterlife. Like, if there is a heaven, I'd love to go," but he's a very reasonable, logical thinker, very analytical, um, but he went like, we went to church our entire relationship. We've been together 19 years this summer, and he's just an amazing person in general. He loves me so much, he would do anything for
Oh,
me. So, we went to church pretty much this entire time we've been together until I deconverted. And so, I have to tell you that I think the reason why I started thinking, like, about the Jonah and the whale story is because I started hearing a lot of these stories with him sitting right beside me. I started hearing them how he would hear them, and I'd be
right.
thinking, "Oh my gosh, what is Brian thinking right now?" So, I was hearing them through his ears in a way and wondering, "What is he thinking?" And he never would be like we wouldn't get in the car and he'd be like, "That is the most ridiculous story I've ever heard. That is the stupidest." He never said that. We would just get in the car and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, that was a really nice service," or he would always find something, positive out of the message, because he's just a very positive person. So he would come away with like, "Yeah, there's a good message. Jesus said something good." So he can find the positive in anything. But I started really hearing things how he would, and I would just be like,
Wow.
"Oh my god, that is so embarrassing."
So
So
that's fascinating. So that's like rationality by osmosis, and
yes.
really kind of imagining, yeah, this it's that putting yourself in his shoes, that kind of intersubjectivity where you are
Yeah,
embarrassed about these stories because you're hearing them from his point of view. I think that's
exactly.
fascinating.
Yeah, and so even things like the rapture, which is what I was brought up believing, my family, like my grandma, she believes it to this day. Like if you got her to start talking about it, she could go on and on for hours. And so she'd come over and she'd start talking about the rapture, and even though like yes, I believed in it at that time, she'd start talking about it and inside I'd be like, "Oh, what is Brian thinking right now?" Cuz I'd start thinking this sounds so ridiculous. If anyone would have just told me, like, she's telling my husband, I'd be like, "These people are crazy." So, yeah.
Was there a sense that you're also getting stuff from popular culture? Because when you speak to a lot of people who are ensconced within a particular religious community, quite often they don't question things because no one around them questions things. They don't watch TV, listen to podcasts or whatever that are outside of their bubble,
Mhm.
and their partner is equally a religious believer, and so that's what kind of keeps you in there. But were you able to, I wonder whether you were just watching normal TV with your husband
Oh,
who
yeah.
wasn't believing, and then there are maybe elements of skeptical thinking that you may not explicitly see it as that, but like you're getting a sense of what's plausible and implausible. You're not just watching Christian films and Christian TV channels and whatnot.
Yeah, no, we watched, We 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 watched regular TV shows and movies and listened to music. We actually listened to mostly Christian music because that's what I enjoyed, and he enjoyed, listening to it as well because he thought it was just positive and uplifting.
Or
He
at least that's what he
but
told you. I mean, the question
yeah.
is, did he really enjoy that? He sounds like such a nice guy. He'd be
He's
like,
such a
I
nice
am
guy.
in living hell here, but I can't let her know that this is such bad
I
music.
know.
Please,
He
please,
really
please deconvert,
he
please.
is such a nice guy. I want everyone to meet him one day. Like I need to do a show with him because he's honestly amazing. But I have to say, like, we would turn on certain shows or movies, and he would know within 5 minutes, like, oh, she's probably gonna say, no, we can't watch this. And sure enough, I'd be like, no, we can't watch this because I'd feel convicted, like to use Christian lingo. Um, I turned off so many shows just because of, like, too much sex or gore or language, I would just I'd feel, because I actually thought Jesus is sitting right here with us. I can't watch
It's
this.
you, your
So
husband on one side, who's this like
yeah,
rationalist, who's like
yeah,
not being too nice, and Jesus on the other side. So,
yeah,
guys, is this too much swearing? Too much swearing? I mean, you
yeah,
don't care, but how about
exactly.
you, G? Too much swearing?
Yeah, and Brian would be like, "Okay, no problem," and he'd turn it off, and, so now I'm like, "Ooh, let's watch this, let's watch this," and he's just like, "Oh my
Do you know
gosh,
what?
you're."
There's not enough swearing in this, and
I
like
know,
it's just how the
I know,
worm has turned.
he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Well, now I don't feel that guilt." Like, I'm not going out and looking for, like, the raunchiest things I can watch, but now I'm not censoring everything, because I we watched season 1. Here's an example. We watched season 1 of Stranger Things,
Uh-huh.
and, we loved it, but then at the very end of season 1, they were playing Dungeons& and Dragons, which that's how they started
Yeah,
the season with, and I
yeah.
remember being uncomfortable because I was like, "Oh, Dungeons& and Dragons," but then they didn't really do it again, but then they ended it the same way with Dungeons& and Dragons, and I remembered, and it was after that season ended, I really struggled with my mental health again. Has nothing to do with the show, but I attributed that because I had opened a door to the demonic. So I said, "We can't watch season 2 because
Wow.
I just let Satan in." He Now my mind is, like, struggling, and he's like, "Okay, no problem. We won't watch season 2." So we actually have never watched the rest of Stranger Things,
Oh,
and
come
I
on.
I know
And
we need to.
now's the
We need
time.
to. We've just forgotten, but I felt so guilty because I had opened this door to the devil because they had played Dungeons& and Dragons on this show.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah,
that's how I live.
because the devil mainly lives through geeks, right? Just like that's how it is.
Yeah,
I know.
but
I say that as a geek
ugh,
myself.
no, but I grew up being told how awful Dungeons& and Dragons was, and now just being a part of, the online, like, just getting to know so many, uh, deconverted Christians and atheists, and they all love Dungeons& and Dragons, and I'm just like, I grew up being told how horrible this game and to stay away from it, and everyone I know and adore now, uh, is so into it, so I'm like, "Ah, it's not
Well,
that bad."
it's like, but they don't say it's a cherry picking. I used to work as a teacher in a Catholic school actually, and you know, I knew people who were like, oh, we don't. Actually, ours was fine, but I knew people in other schools who were like, oh, we don't allow Harry Potter to be taught in the school. And
Oh,
you're like,
yeah, I've never seen
seriously?
it or watched
But
read it.
but then when you talk about like whether Dungeons and Dragons or Harry Potter, you go, but you're happy with Lord of the Rings, yeah, because that was J.R. Tolkien and he was Christian.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just wondering if there's a bit of double standards there, but yeah, there you
Oh,
go.
definitely, definitely.
But so you have talked about how moving from Pentecostalism to Calvinism was one of the first kind of stepping stones of deconverting. Do you want to kind of talk to
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so that is, part of the beginning of my deconstruction slash deconversion, um, in 2019. So, yeah, it's almost 4 years ago is when this kind of began. Um, I came across a documentary called American Gospel, and it basically exposed it's a Christian documentary, just so you know, but it, exposed all the craziness of the charismatic Christianity, basically what I was raised with, everything I've just kind of talked about, the whole word of faith, the name it and claim it, um, all the preachers I listened to, like Joyce Meyer and Joel Osteen and all the fake healings and all of that, speaking in tongues. It just talked about how it's just not biblical. And I was, like I had said earlier, I really wanted to just be such a good Christian. I wanted to follow the Bible, as perfectly as I could and just be so true to God. And that documentary was heavily influenced by Calvinism, and the Reformed Church, and so that actually got me into Calvinism, but at the same time, it gave me kind of the power to start questioning everything that I had ever been taught, because a lot of things that I was unsure about, like speaking in tongues, like, is this actually real? Because there's times where you just feel so silly. I never spoke in tongues in front of my husband, like ever, because I just thought it was really silly. So finding out, okay, that's actually not biblical for at the time when I still believed biblical for modern times. It was just that practice was done when the apostles died. Um, I was like, okay, so I always really felt strange about it. So now I know that's not something that we need to continue doing. There was a bunch of other things, like there's no longer the gift of healing. There's pastors who claim to have the gift of healing. That's no longer something that people can have. Yes, God can heal, is what I believed. But people can't possess the gift of healing like the apostles did. So these little things that I always kind of had question marks over, I felt like they were answered after I watched this documentary, and I was kind of getting some questions answered. So I promised myself after watching this, okay, I'm starting to finally get answers to things. Thank you, Crystal. Me too. Um, I promised myself, okay, I'm never gonna not allow myself to find answers to things, because all everything that I was finding out was things that I always felt off about. So I'm going to just, if I have a question, I'm finding it out. None of this stuffing it away. Um, like again. So that was the beginning of my deconstruction.
I
Mhm.
was going to say, was there an element where you are a bit like if I sit back and watch two different denominations of Christianity argue with each other, and I'm like, yeah, you're right about them, and you're right about them, because you're both wrong. So, was there an element of going from one denomination, if you like, to another, where
Mhm.
their criticisms of them in your mind, and their criticisms of your previous belief system are now like, oh yeah, that was rubbish, and that you don't do that, and which then leaves you thinking, well, then could that be applied to my present belief
Yeah,
system? Do you know what I mean?
it I did think that. I thought that I thought that, okay, before I was deceived. Now I don't think I am deceived, but at the same time, my my Christian friends from before basically thought I was no longer a Christian just by going to this new Christian church. So they already thought, even though I'm now an atheist, they already thought that I was no longer a Christian a few years ago just by going to a different denomination. So it's like, okay, well, but yeah, I was still kinda like, "Well, how do I know I'm still not being deceived?" So, yeah, you're once you've been duped, you're just like, how do I know I'm not being duped again?" So, yeah, is that kinda what you were wondering? Yeah.
And just so, what were the other sort of seeds of doubt? What helped you? And you mentioned things like Jonah and some of these big, I suppose,
Mhm.
big stories that kind of unlock the idea that literalism is the only way. And it's I see.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is one of the weakest parts of any belief system. If that is an integral part of your belief system, if you're not like a New Age kind of or lovey-dovey New Testament Christian, where you can just go, yeah, never really had that. But if your belief is based on the literalism of the Old Testament, and then that starts falling apart, then the whole thing comes down like a house of cards.
Yeah. Well, what I was learning in the Calvinist part of Christianity is Jesus is woven through the entire Old Testament, so there's pieces of him that you can see in every story, so that kinda just strengthened my whole belief in those Old Testament stories, even with Jonah, like, Jonah was in the fish for 3 days, so Jesus was dead for 3 days, and then he was risen, so I was like, "Okay, well, I guess that kinda makes sense," and so they they kind of like the Old Testament and the New Testament, they go together. There's a pairing and just reinforces it. And then the church that I was attending as a Calvinist, they read the Old Testament first and then the New Testament and they bring it together. And so,
Which is funny because I,
yeah,
I believe that those two books are just entirely
completely
incongruous and
different.
they just
Oh,
don't
yeah.
fit together at all.
I think so
But
too.
yeah.
I absolutely agree. Like I see, obviously now I see it as two, like almost two well, I think they are two totally
Mm,
different gods completely. Like I've done so much more learning and doing it in a way that I think is way more fascinating and not trying to make it
mm.
all fit in this one little box, right? But um yeah, I still I am glad that uh the Old Testament always seemed silly to me and that freaked me out when I was a Christian. Turns out it is silly. Yep, it is. It's bizarre. But they
So
wanna make it all sound like one big, they just call the Bible like a love story. I don't think it's a love story.
pretty horrendous.
Sadistic.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I love a bit of dashing babies' heads on rocks and slavery. Slavery is particularly lovely.
Oh, it's so
Um,
beautiful.
it's uh, so what's how did that sort of last part of your deconversion go? Then you started having doubts and questioning. Where did you go when you were having these questions? Did you keep it in your own head? Did you go to your husband? Did you go to anyone
Well,
else? Did you go to the internet?
so what happened is, um, we became members at that Calvinist church, and then right after we became members, we moved away, like 4 hours away, to where we're living now, and we did not have a church here. We did not know anybody here. Our kids were no longer in the private Christian school that they were attending. I had no friends because all my friends were the moms of the Christian school. So we moved here and we were just alone. My mom was here already. She moved a couple months before us. And so we got here and I was just like, okay, I don't really know anyone. It's just kind of we're here by ourselves. And my routine had changed. And so before, what would happen is like my husband would be at work, our kids would go to school. I decided to homeschool for the first couple of months that we were here because it was still during the pandemic. And um the Christian school here was a lot more than what we were paying where we lived before, so it was just kind of out of our budget, so I was like, "Well, I'll homeschool for a bit." So I was busy, I wasn't so what I would do before is my husband would work, the kids would go to school, I'd come home, do all my housework, and listen to sermons, like, nonstop all day. So this time I know, doesn't that sound like the dream? Um So now I was at home homeschooling, not listening to sermons. And then what I would do, what did I do? Oh, yeah, I started doing home projects. And um, I came across like just these random podcasts. And one of them was on multi level marketing, which I was really fascinated because it's very multi level marketing is very cult like, right? And this lady had on Stephen Hassan, who he's the cult expert and he created the bite model. And I don't know if you're familiar with the bite model, but the
Enlighten me.
okay, I always forget what they stand for, but the bite model stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And it's basically he came up with it because it's a way that cults will control what their members do by behavior, information, thought, and emotions. And I was like, this is fascinating. So I went through um uh just look it up later, Stephen Hassan's bite model. And from there I listened to more podcasts. I started listening to the QAnon podcasts because I'm really fascinated with cults and their mentality. And after listening to like a QAnon podcast and listening to this MLM one and learning about the bite model, I was like, okay, wait a second. Wait a second. These are all starting to sound so much like the church. And there really is not a lot of like differentiation between all of it. And eventually, I feel like I'm going to just have to admit that they're all the same. And I was keeping this to myself, um, but I started investigating more into some of the claims of Christianity and how the Bible was created, just some of the stories. And I came across the Noah's Ark story. And when I found out that, no, I should back it up just one little part first. I was getting a lot of information that was starting to scare me, but the fear of hell was just right here, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, if I take one more step, there's a really good chance if there is a hell, I'm probably gonna go there," and I'm terrified. And
I wonder how many people that stops from taking that extra step. Do you know, especially in a world where you can look stuff up on the internet. Like 50 years ago, you'd be stuck in this
oh,
bubble.
yeah.
30 years ago, you'd be stuck in this bubble where it was quite hard. It would be quite hard to get out of if you're surrounded by a community that's kind of enforcing that. I mean, you're lucky by point of fact that you've got a husband that seems to be all right with being
He's
taken from one
awesome.
one church to another. It's like, what, we're Calvinists now? Really? Like, okay, like whatever.
Yeah,
Like, so
exactly.
I mean, I had free will last week. This week turns out it's all a
Yeah.
load of bollocks. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so,
Pretty much.
but for many people, that's going to be this situation where, you know, they don't take that extra step because, oh, what this is going to send me to hell, so I'm not going to look at that.
Yeah. So, well, this is another story about my husband. So, he was he was working from home this day, and he it was like 8:30 in the morning, and he came up just to heat up his coffee, and I was starting to like unravel things that were just blowing my mind. And he came in the kitchen, and I just like cornered him all of a sudden because things were starting to connect for me. And I was like, "Brian, do you believe in evolution or creation?" And he's like, "Wait, what?" Like, "Let me heat up my coffee. It's 8:30. What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Just tell me, do you believe in evolution or creation?" And I knew he believed in evolution. We just never talked about it because I believed in creation. And he's like, "Well, maybe there's room for both." Like, he was trying to be very kind. And I'm like, "No, just tell me, like, do you believe the earth is 1,000 old?" "No, there's no way that's even possible." And I'm like, "Okay, so you believe in evolution." So he's like, "Well, yeah, of course. There's evidence for that everywhere. You can't dispute it." And I'm like, "Okay, that's all I wanted to know." So then I was saying to him, I'm like, "Oh, I'm starting to find things out, and I'm starting to doubt everything, but I'm terrified of hell. Like, I'm just terrified if I find things out, I'm going to go to hell." And he said he came across a quote on Twitter a couple of days before, and he's like, "Maybe this will help you." I don't know, because he never believed in hell, which I was like, "How can you not? You're crazy." But I was the crazy one. And so he found it for me, he in his feed, and it basically said, life is a spark between two identical voids, the one before birth and the one after death. And all of a sudden, I just was like, "Oh my god, you're right. I have no idea what life was before I was born. It's an entire eternity. I have no concept. I had no consciousness. So, yeah, I don't think anything happens after I die. I think this is fine. I think I can keep
You just had
exploring."
a nihilistic existential like
It was like a
enlightenment. Ah.
yeah, I was like, "Thank you." He's like, "You're welcome." Like, he had no idea just 37 years of just or 36, I don't even know, but I was just like, "You have no idea what you just did for me." So after that, I could just go and explore, and I had no fear, which is crazy because after all those years, um, I never really dealt with a lot of the fear afterwards, and so I was able to explore things, and that's when I came across, the Noah's Ark myth being found in other mythologies that predated the Bible, and as soon as I found that out, everything I just was like, "Okay, it's all a lie. If there's one lie in this Bible that's supposed to be the word of God and full of truth, if there's one lie, then it's all a lie because why would God lie?" So, it pretty much fell apart in one instant after a couple of months/years, but it really ramped up, in those
It's
few
interesting.
months.
I was talking about the precariousness of faith based on the Old Testament, and I was speaking to Dr. Josh Bowen. You've interviewed him on Skeptic
Mhm.
Haven, and he was saying that, and he was like well into Christianity. So he got, I think, masters in this, and was doing some theology thing, and then he was learning. He went to learn about the ancient Near East and learned. But he was going to be a pastor, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, he was like full in there. And then in learning about the ancient Near East and learning languages and whatever, he came across, like you're talking about, the things, it's this intertextuality between the Bible, and other books, and that kind of
Mhm.
relationship, and well, actually this story is from there, and then he said that after all his life of being in the zone, in terms of his Christianity, it unraveled in 48 hours. He just like deconverted like that because it just all just completely unraveled. The whole of the Bible
Mhm.
just fell apart. Really
Yeah.
fascinating. Go and check, for those watching. Go and check my interview with Dr. Josh Brown on this channel, and have a listen to that. Really interesting. But sorry,
That's
I
awesome.
hijacking your
No, no,
experience.
that's sometimes it makes me feel better knowing that for some people it fell apart that quickly after so
Mm,
many years. Because there's times where I'm like, "Should it have taken longer?" But as soon as you see that one thing, it's it's like the toothpaste is out of the tube. You can't put it
mm,
back in, right? And
yeah.
that's how it felt, and, um, I started learning a little bit more and investigating a little more. It was still kinda scary, um,
I
but
guess it helped living on your
yeah,
own, being away from those other
that's
the
exactly.
church. Yeah, so you're not going to church and having it reinforced, but you're starting to be able to fulfill your inquisitive nature and look into these things. I assume you had the internet, and therefore, these things were easy to come by.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and, I started going to different websites and podcasts, and it felt oh, yeah, it
Yeah, so Ricky Johnson says, "Yep, learning that Noah's Eve was lifted from mythology broke me out of fundy mindset." But then for certain others, so series says, "I was able to stave it off for a while reading Genesis, flood, and various apologetics." So there are,
yeah,
of course, naturally there have to be apologetic, uh, ways, mechanisms to explain away
yeah.
the criticisms. But I guess if you're, well, why did you not go to those apologetics?
Um, okay, so when I did so I was, not long after that Noah's Ark, discovery, I ended up telling my husband that I no longer believed in God, and I wanted to just see how it felt just coming out of my mouth if I was gonna be struck dead, and it felt very natural, it felt very freeing, and he said, "I don't think you're wrong. Just, take this very slowly because it was my entire identity, my entire life. It was just who I was a Christian." He didn't want me to probably regret it or question it and then be like, "Oh, what did I do? Why did I say that?" and feel bad. So,
What a lovely human
but
being. I would have been like, right, here's a Cambridge companion to atheism. Right, let's go for it. Yeah.
he was so sweet, but he was like, "I don't think you're wrong. Just make sure you're sure about this, right?" But I said to him, I was like, "I really don't want to go to yeah, basically like the Bible or apologetics, because I said, I feel like I said, I'm so tired of people using the Bible to prove the Bible is true. And I didn't even know there was a term for that, was circular logic. I just was like, I'm so sick of that, because every time I've gone to ask questions about certain things in the Bible, they always use the Bible to point you back to the Bible, and I'm sick of that.
So my local church, I took a picture of this and wrote an article on it once years back. But my local church used to have this massive banner outside, and it's just this big long blue banner that says "The Bible is true," and then in the bottom right hand corner it said something like First Timothy 2 or whatever. It's like the Bible is true. Footnote: the Bible.
Oh
It's
my
like
gosh.
I was
Like,
like, this is
thanks for that.
genius. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
hilarious. Yeah, because even when, I was questioning it, like, before I came across that, um, and I was opening up to my husband saying, like, "Oh, I'm kind of struggling right now, in those few months." He's like, "Well, did you wanna talk to the pastor?" Like, he was trying to talk to me on in my language. I was like, "No," because
Such a nice person.
he's just gonna, like, reinforce this, and I don't wanna talk to him. And he's like, "Okay, I was just seeing if that's what you wanted." And I was like, "No, because I know what he's gonna say, and that's not what I wanna hear right now. I wanna find things out that
He's
is
gonna
not
send me
gonna
back to
reinforce."
hell, and I don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's like, "Okay, no problem." So, yeah, he was being very, very sweet and understanding, but yeah.
I was listening to you talk about this a little bit, and
Mhm.
about how, and I was fascinating this. I was almost excited with you, and you were talking about how the when you were first kind of looking into these ideas that you've been talking about, how you get on like Reddit, and then your heart would be hammering. Do you want to sort of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, say that again. I was just checking out one thing.
Just checking my emails. Yeah, sorry.
No, I
That's
was
what
checking
I
out the comments. I
was.
just wanted to see if I saw comments, so say that.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I just given up on this interview, so
No,
I was just I was booking a holiday.
that's
No,
not it.
so you were talking in a
Yeah.
previous interview about
Oh, okay, a previous
how
one,
you're
yeah.
really excited or
Yeah.
nervous about, you would go onto Reddit and then look at these sort of
Yes.
questions, and then your heart be hammering. Do you want to
Yes.
talk a little bit to that?
Yeah. Okay, I actually was gonna say that earlier too. So I did actually, Reddit had a bit to do with
Mm.
there's so many little things that had to do with this whole deconversion, but, um I went on Reddit, and I wanted to just see what other people had to say about being an ex-Christian. Um, there's a couple of boards, ex-Christian, I think deconversion or deconstruction, ex-Calvinist. So I joined the ex-Christian board, and my heart was pounding out of my chest just joining the board. Um, and so I started reading, like, some of the threads, and I was like, I felt like I should not be here. I should not be reading this. But then as I was reading it, things were starting to make so much sense. What these people were saying, what they had been through. I was like, oh my goodness, they sound like me, or just just everything that they were saying was making way more sense than anything a Christian would say, rather than like, "Oh, just give it to God." Because I had even reached out to a Christian friend saying, like, something's happening, like, I think I'm losing my faith." And they said, "Oh, you need to just read this book called The Attributes of God. It'll strengthen your faith." And I was like, "No, I don't wanna do that." I was like, so I
Brilliant.
was wondering if maybe they were feeling the same way, but no, they just wanted me to reinforce it. So, um, but then I went on the board, and then my heart, I scanned it for maybe like 5 or 6 minutes, and then I did feel really guilty. And so I left it. I was like, "I can't be on here. Like, this is way too scary because these people are making way too much sense." So I left it and closed
Is
my
this before
phone.
you had admitted that you're an atheist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was before. So then when I finally did tell my husband, um, and then I I know we're probably gonna talk about when I told my mom, because that's what it says in the title, but, um, if you have time still, that
No, I
I
reckon
can.
we just leave your mum out of it and just like, haha, there you go, fooled
Haha.
you. We never talked about it. Yeah, no, we'll get onto that.
Yeah, yeah, but, yeah, I went back and joined the board as soon as I told my husband, I was like, "I'm going back on that board because it was so interesting, and I love that board, and
Oh.
it's been great,
But
yeah,
but
so
there is so much to say about and actually I'm going to interrupt myself. Thank you so much,
Ah,
Andy. Have a tipple on me, Mr. Pierce, Mr. P.
aw,
Thank you so much. In fact, I am having a tipple, so I really appreciate that.
yay.
Thanks, mate. That's really great. So uh, uh, yeah, this idea. I've forgotten where I was going to go. Yeah. Oh yeah, that was
You've
it.
had
So
too many tipples.
yeah, I was just
Just
I'm
joking.
all tippled out. Um, yeah, there is. Well, I can imagine a sense of excitement, a sense of awe in a whole new world that's opened up to you, a whole world that you can explore and find out about. Was
Mhm.
that something that was exciting? Was that something that was it liberating? What? How did you feel? Removing the shackles
Oh my
of
gosh.
belief, or were they not shackles? I mean, how did you see it?
It felt incredible. Um, I felt probably for the first couple of months, I would wake up every single day excited. Like, I had butterflies in my stomach, and I would
Oh,
wake up
awesome.
thinking, "I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm not a Christian." And I felt so excited because I
Why?
would
Why? Okay, let's explore that. What? Why would you wake up going, "I'm not a Christian," on you? What's the excitement there? Is it the excitement of where you were going, or the relief of what you left behind, or both?
I think both. I think because, um I was learning so much. This was before I even knew anybody online. Now I'm just excited because I have so many friends. But before that, I didn't know anyone, but I was just getting to know some channels, and I was watching videos, and my mind was being blown by the content, and just like, how did I not know this? Or things that I had always sort of wondered, and they were explaining it, and I was just like, okay, I always thought that was strange. I can't think of any.
Would it be something like, for example, because I always marvel at this, like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John writing the
Mhm.
Gospels they weren't eyewitnesses of Jesus, like they weren't
Yeah,
Jesus's mates, that kind of thing. Like there's so many
yeah.
lay people, and you'll find that pastors, or particularly in like the things like the Church of England, the Catholic faith, where you've got a very different style of learning how to be in that position, and you get a lot more
Hmm.
critical scholarship that people have to go through and learn,
Oh
and
yeah.
they know an awful lot, but they don't ever tell their lay people that particularly. It's not like they stand up and give a sermon and say, well, we all know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were just names attributed to the gospel writers. And of
Right.
course, we know that they weren't eyewitnesses. But anyway, and we know this
Hmm.
is written 100 years after Jesus, or
Yeah.
70 years after Jesus died, or whatever. And they never tell you that. But so were there these kind of things that you were finding out about?
Yes, exactly. I think the very first scholar I came across was Bart Ehrman, and yeah, so I listened. My husband read a book of his, and then I was listening to talks and podcasts of his, and um, just compare the way he says that he writes down. He says you're not supposed to read like them in order. You're supposed to read
Yeah.
them, yeah, across. And when he would give examples of just the differences in them, and I was just like, wow, like it was so interesting. And then um I listened to the Old
Sorry,
Testament.
is this to say that your husband was deconverting with you? Like
No,
it's like, yeah, I'm
he
going to read
just
some Bart Ehrman as well. Yeah,
he
yeah. It turns
read
out I was right.
yeah, no, he read Misquoting Jesus by Bart
Yeah, good
Ehrman.
book.
I checked that out from the library for him because he always had certain questions about the Bible, and so I was like, "Oh, I think you'll like this book." He loved it. He's like, "Yeah, this has all the questions answered for me that I've kinda had," and I was like, "Do you want me to get you more?" He's like, "No, I'm good." He's like, "That's all I needed." Because he wasn't as devout and devoted to it as I was, so for him, it was just
But
like,
did
"Yeah, I
he
just
did he
need."
believe at all? Like, I mean,
not
No.
really.
So yeah.
He believes that there may have quite possibly been a historical person named Jesus, but as far as any sort of divine attributes, no.
Yeah.
He hated
Pretty much.
Paul. That's that's a joke between us is he just hated Paul. So anytime I would quote scripture, he's like, "Well, who wrote that? Was it did Jesus say it or did Paul write it?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Paul." He's like, "Oh, who cares?" So, so yeah, as far as being excited, I felt free to finally believe in evolution and just explore those ideas. And I found it fascinating because how could you not? It was just really cool to finally being able to admit, yes, of course, this is how the world was created, or everything was created. It wasn't a 6-day spoken into existence ordeal. Um, yeah, and just not being so ignorant on a lot of things. Uh, it was just exciting. I went to the library last or when it all began and checked out so many books. I read a book by Richard Dawkins called Outgrowing God
All right.
and
That's a fairly recent one.
loved
Yeah.
that book. Yeah, it was such a good book and just amazing. And then from there, I discovered Seth Andrews. I did not know who he was and read his book Deconverted. And because I just
Well, I'm
wanted to,
being interviewed by Seth Andrews on the 23rd of May about this book. That's a
yay!
spam alert.
Yay!
Woo.
Good. Yeah, Seth is amazing. So when I read his book, because I just at that time too, I wanted to know, has anyone else gone through this? Because I mean, obviously, I knew people had to have, but when I read Seth's book, I was like, wow, his story is so much like mine. Like he was raised in it and then he left, and like he knows exactly what I'm going through. This is crazy. Like I had no idea. And he wrote a book about it. So the fact that there was another person who wrote a book about what I was going through just blew my mind. Um,
Which is fascinating because
yeah.
there are so many people that are that don't deconvert and they know all those books out there and they spend all their time arguing online because I argue with them, right? So they know all those books exist, but they've got their own set of books, and
Yeah.
whereas you've come from a much more sort of sheltered, academically speaking, like
Mhm.
you some people grow up in the world of apologetics, right? Arguing with atheists and blah blah blah. You
Mhm.
haven't gone through that, and then haven't really known that that's existed so much, almost by the sounds of it.
Yeah. No, not at all. So, yeah, it was so cool to know that there was a community of people that are there for you if you want to to know them um once you're out. And so, yeah, it's just been super incredible.
So, to talk a little bit about the experiences of your mum. So, Stacey's
Yeah.
mum.
Stacey's mom. Yep. um, so it was not long. It was a couple of days after I told my husband that I went and told my mom because she and I are so close and I tell her everything. So it's actually weird that I went through all of this and didn't tell her right away. Um, so I told her, we went out for coffee and I was excited and nervous, but more excited. And I told her, and I was kind of like, I wonder what she's going to say. But I had kind of been dropping these little like hints for the last couple of months, like something's going on. Christians are just, I don't know. They're acting so weird because it was also during the pandemic. And hence why I had been listening to podcasts on QAnon um, at that time. And we went out for coffee and I was trying to say it. She's like, "Would you just come out and tell me, what are you trying to tell me?" And I was like, "Okay, I told Brian the other night, I don't believe in God anymore. I'm just done." And she's like, "Okay, finally, finally I can be honest." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" she's like, I've struggled with this for years, Stacie. Years I have not believed, but I just have such a strong belief in hell that I just I haven't been able to shake that. And but I have not believed in God forever. And I'm like, what? So um, she's like, "Yes, and I didn't know who to talk to because you have always been such a strong Christian, and there's been times where I've come to you and asked certain things like, "So when you pray, do you really believe God will answer you?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." Um, and she's just tried to feel out where I was in my faith, and so she's like, "Okay," and she never wanted to shake my faith because she thought if there was a God, she would be sinning, and she also didn't wanna take me down with her, so to speak. So she just really didn't have anyone to talk to. And
Oh,
so when I told her, uh, we were able to just have these really great conversations and
did
ended up
her
going
it
through this.
did her deconversion involve like going online and seeking out answers, or was it just all in her head?
It was just she really struggled in her head. She tried really hard to just kind of fake it till you make it, and I said, You really fooled me because I thought that I really did not know that you struggled as hard as you did." And there was a time a couple years ago, where she had tried to tell my stepdad that she didn't believe, and he was just like, "You can't say that, you can't say that." So she just was like, "Okay, fine." She's like, "I actually said the words to him, 'I don't think there's a God,' and he didn't wanna hear it." So she just didn't say anything again, and, um, she just didn't have anyone to talk to. So, um, when I yeah, she didn't go online or anything. She didn't seek any answers out. She just felt like a really bad Christian, because I think she thought there probably was, but she felt really bad because she didn't think there was, if that makes sense. I
Mm.
think. Yeah. I think that's probably how she was feeling at that time, like, there probably is one, but I don't think there is one, so I'm a really bad Christian for not thinking there is one. It's so weird.
It's
You
amazing how, again, for her, that hold that hell has, it's
Yeah.
such an incredibly. I've spoken to so many Christians that either that's a thing that keeps them in, or on the flip side, that's a thing that breaks their belief. So once they
Yeah.
realize that hell is so deeply, deeply flawed and problematic, that
Mhm.
like eternal conscious torment for like these pretty finite issues, is like, yeah, this person is homosexual because, that's kind of how they've been designed and made, type of thing. And you're
Yeah.
like, and they're going to go to hell for eternal conscious torment. That's forever. That's like a really long time. Like, does that sound very fair? Not really. I
No.
met this guy. He's a really nice guy, and he's going to go to hell forever. And so that kind of doesn't jive with a lot of people, or it's the thing, as you said, that keeps you hooked in because you're so afraid of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and her fear of hell has hung on a lot longer
Mm,
than mine did. Mine was pretty much gone that day that I
mm,
mentioned. Um, Hers has hung on, uh I think she still gets moments of panic, even now,
yeah.
but I think that sounds a bit more normal for people to to go through.
Yeah, I've interviewed a number of people who've that the hell thing can be
Years.
something that, yeah, that takes some time to get over. Is
Yes.
there anything from your religious belief that you miss, that you regret not believing or experiencing as part of the community or whatever, or are you pretty stoked to where you're at?
Um, I'm absolutely stoked to where I'm at. I've never been happier. Like, I'm being 100% honest, I've never been happier in my life. Um, but
Awesome.
I'd say the only thing that I do miss is I really did enjoy the praise and worship music. That was the one thing that I did enjoy. Um, that's probably it, but
Yeah, it's funny. I
that's
mean, this is
small.
what a lot of people like the Sunday Assembly and movements like that. I think
Mhm.
are really worthy because it's the understanding that there is a lot in religious belief, in the process, in the ritual, in the whatever of religious belief that is enjoyable or is something that is worth holding on to. And so when you have things like the Sunday Assembly, which is going and hang out with like-minded people, just it's not so much about worldview. It's about enjoying, people who are aligned with you. I mean, in the same way that you go to a sports club and play sports and
Mhm.
do things with your mates that you love doing. And the Sunday Assembly kind of taps into that, and
Yeah.
and part of that, one of the big important parts is singing and music brings people together. So
Yeah.
I yeah, for sure understand that.
Yeah, and one thing, like, we were talking earlier about how they can bring that feeling of the Holy Spirit, it being there, and you can be in the presence of God. One of the things that I did notice when I was still a Christian is I would go to a lot of concerts, when I was in my 20s, like not Christian concerts, but there would be certain times where the music would be so good, and I would get goosebumps all over my body, and I would be thinking, "Hey, wait a second, this isn't Christian music." And I was always told that
Wow, interesting.
goosebumps are a sign of the Holy Spirit being there, and I'm
Mm.
like, "This is not a Christian concert. Why is the Holy Spirit here?"
What's he
So
doing?
I
Does he
was
really
like,
like this band? Maybe the Holy Spirit just really likes his band.
yeah. So that was kind of like a, there's something's not right.
That's really interesting because
Yeah.
I'm a massive music file. I've seen gazillions of bands,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. I mean, my CD collection there is pretty behemoth, um, and yeah, so music's really important. In fact, the band T-shirt I'm wearing right
I
now,
was
James.
wondering. Yeah.
So they're like a 90s indie band from Manchester. They're still going. I'm going to see them next week, and they are being supported by a gospel choir and a full orchestra. They're doing an orchestra and gospel choir tour with them doing all their they've had like 16 studio albums or whatever. Anyway, I went to see them, I think in Brixton Academy. I've seen them like, I don't know, 20 times or whatever. I saw them in
Yeah.
Brixton Academy, and it was absolutely grand. And everyone was singing every word of all
Oh.
these songs, and and I had an experience, and I've had this in several concerts, but this particular one, I had this experience where if I was religious, this would be a religious experience. Like what
Right.
I'm having here is a form of kind of mass hysteria, if you like,
Mhm.
or a higher level of experience that is brought on by this by everyone being here. I couldn't experience this without this being everyone experience the same kind of the same song, the same joy in the
Yeah.
music, singing the same lyrics, and that kind of unison takes you to this other level, and you're like, that is a religious experience. But
Oh,
I,
totally.
I, I've spoken to like other Christians and like, yeah, I understand what you say, and it doesn't seem like it's as important because it's just a band. But I'm
Yeah.
like, no, this is genuinely I've experienced. I'm pretty sure I've experienced what you've experienced, but you call that God, and I just will explain that in loads of other psychological ways.
Yeah,
Sorry.
definitely. No, no, I completely agree, but that was something that I did tuck away, like, "Okay, that's definitely not God."
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was something I did want to say this. This is absolutely spot on. Where is it? Someone right back here said, talking about TV,
Mhm.
um, Pragmatic Crystal
Oh,
says this: anything Mike Flanagan does is amazing, right? Have you got Netflix?
yes.
Do you know Mike Flanagan? Have you heard of Mike
I've
Flanagan?
heard of him, yeah.
So he's written and directed a series called Midnight Mass, right?
Okay.
My advice is go and watch Midnight Mass. It's a
Oh,
horror series, but it's not actually a horror series. It's a series about religion and
yes.
his look into the religion and belief, and it's got one of the best monologues of any piece of TV or film I've ever seen. Where this woman, and you see her at 2 points in this story arc, where she's talking about her child who's died, you know, she's pregnant, a child died or whatever, and she imagines heaven where
Yeah.
it would be, right? And then she has that same kind of thought process going on, but much later in a completely different context, and her whole monologue is entirely different. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Okay, I've heard about I actually started I think I watched episode 1 and then I forgot about it, but they filmed it where I used to live, Midnight Mass.
Ah,
Yeah, and then it was filmed during COVID in
yes,
2020, I believe,
yeah.
and my husband and I walked by the set when we were on a date one night, so it was really
Oh,
cool.
brilliant. Oh,
So,
brilliant.
I w
Well,
I
yeah, watch it
yeah,
and just think that this is really about religion, and think in
okay.
that context. And actually, because there are like it's kind of billed as a horror, but actually it has elements in. But it's really about
Yeah,
these big like speeches that go on between the people.
okay,
That's what it's all about. It's just
okay.
really, really brilliant.
I'll have to start
Um,
it from episode 1 again because I don't
yeah.
remember.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
But anyway, I thought I'd had to mention that because someone said it earlier. So
Mhm,
what were your just a few more questions? What
mhm.
were your challenges leaving religion? Your biggest challenges, you think? Did you think you've got away lightly in terms of the psychological ramifications or social ramifications of leaving religion? Like some people really struggle in terms of family or friends and things
Um,
like that.
yeah, I think the biggest struggle, was we got, publicly excommunicated from the church we became members at.
Awesome
Uh, yeah, but we don't live
or
there
not?
anymore. Yeah. So
Publicly excommunicated?
mhm, yeah.
How does that work? Like, they
So
announced that,
yeah,
"By the way,
uh-huh.
don't speak to these
Yeah,
guys are evil, and they're gonna go to
yeah,
hell."
pretty much.
Wow,
Yeah, they did that
wow.
for 7 months, last
Because
April
that's the best
till
way I find to get you back into the fold,
oh,
is
that's
just
what
to
they claim.
ostracize you.
That's what they claim. Yeah. Um, so they did that for 7 months. They mentioned us, quite often had formal announcements, but
Really?
it's definitely
Goodness.
more for the people who are, in the congregation. Oh, and somebody else has also left. They're doing the same thing, excommunicating them right now at that church. So I'm
So,
like, "Oh, good
but
for
I'm
them."
fascinated by what you said there. It's more for the people in the church, and of course
Oh,
it is because it's saying
yes.
it's a threat, isn't it?
Mhm.
If you leave, this is what will happen to you.
Exactly. 100%. So, and I say that every time I talk about this story. So sorry to the people in the chat who have heard me talk about this before. But in case anyone ever watches from the church who are nosy, I always because I want maybe a seed to plant that they're doing it for you, not for us. Um, yeah, so they did that, and of course, we were labeled, "Oh, you were never a Christian to begin with, or you just wanna sin," and all that, which is not true. But the other thing is my brother, he stopped talking to me and my mom. Um, that's been kinda hard, but he's not a Christian, so that's what's confusing to me and my mom is he I don't know why he's so angry that we're no longer Christians.
Yeah, so I saw you talk about that on
Oh, okay.
Atheologica, and
Okay.
I was wondering whether, and for those who haven't seen that, so Stacie, uh, has been kind of rejected by your brother for
Mhm.
your deconversion, even though he's not a
Mhm.
Christian. But
Mm-mm.
would that be more to do with things that probably already existed in a relationship there, that it's not actually the fact that you've come out of
It might
Christianity?
be. It
Yeah,
I really don't know. It coulda just been a good reason for him to just say bye, you know?
yeah.
It could be. So, yeah, but he's
But
used it. Yeah.
yeah. How about friends then? I mean, did
Friends,
you
yeah.
did you? I mean, you said you moved to where you are now and had
Yeah.
no friends.
Yeah,
So
but that's
is
only
it?
because of location. Um, we had no friend but I have, people have yeah, basically stopped communicating, um, because of us not being Christian anymore, um, which is fine. That's totally fine. I expected it, especially people that I was friends with who attended the church. I fully expected that.
Yeah.
Um, they actually stopped talking to me when during COVID after I got vaccinated. That's when they stopped talking to me. So
Really?
yeah,
Was
a
that
lot.
so I was gonna speak to you about, because you were in evangelical Pentecostal
Hmm.
churches, and Calvinist churches might have elements of this, but I presume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there would be a political conservatism associated with that.
Hmm.
And I don't want to second guess what your politics are
It's
now,
okay.
but have you changed politically? Because you quite often see that with people coming out of conservative Christian churches and then rediscovering what they find is important and rejigging their whole moral compass,
Hmm.
and that includes their political compass. Did that happen with you?
Yeah, it has definitely. I think I always felt a certain way politically, but I couldn't necessarily voice it, um, especially when it came to human rights. Um, and the church that we were in spoke very strongly against like the LGBTQ plus community. So that made me very uncomfortable. Um, so now it's awesome not having to, you know,
You can just
not.
believe what you want, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
there's something to be
Yeah,
said for saying, do you know what? I think this is right. So
exactly.
therefore,
Yeah.
I think this is right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not answerable to
No.
anyone. I'm answerable to my own mind and my own sense of
Exactly.
rationality.
Yeah.
There you go.
I know. It still is hard to answer because I still feel that shame for when I might not have spoken up back then, but I was in a different.
Right.
So I still feel like when I talk about that, it's like, oh, okay, obviously I might not have been sensitive, but now I'm very much accepting and I will speak up. But when I talk about how I was then, I wasn't like negative towards people in that community, but I didn't speak up for their rights. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
sure. And I think maybe one way to deal with it is just like, and I could bore you with some philosophy here, like, are we the same person we were 10 minutes ago, let alone 10 years ago? It's like a different iteration of you, and that's not who
Mhm.
you are now. It's
No.
just not who you are now. So
Yeah. But those there was actually a day where I remember being in that Calvinist church and thinking to myself, I wonder it was probably when the pastor was just preaching against it and like cuz he did that a lot, but thinking to myself, I wonder if there is evidence in the animal kingdom that there's same-sex attraction because if there is, then this would prove that this is not a sin. And I had every intention of going home and looking into it, and I it just slipped my mind. It's not because I pushed it away, I just
mm,
act like I forgot about it. And then it wasn't long after that that I did deconvert, and obviously, it didn't matter to me to investigate, but then I did come across that there is, and I was like, "Aha! Alright." I thought about that. Um, so
is
the
this where you
the
wrote a letter to your pastor, like, dear pastor,
Yeah.
it turns out there are gay pandas. Ah,
Yeah.
I told you, or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I have a lot of people in my family who are LGBTQ and
Yeah.
uh those relationships have gotten so much stronger since deconverting and so much closer and I'm thankful for that and I'm also really sad at the time that was missed when I was a Christian. We've had some really open and honest conversations and just I'm so sorry that you felt that, maybe I wouldn't have accepted you then. I really truly have always loved you, but I'm just sorry that, you might not have thought that I did, but yeah,
Yeah.
so it's hard. It's really hard.
So to the viewers, if you've got any questions, any super chats, get them in pretty pronto. Really appreciate you guys they're having a nice chat about music in the side, and I'm almost want to jump in there and have a little talk about Iron Maiden or something, but I'm not going to, because I'm talking to you, Stacie. So
I didn't know what they were talking about.
yeah,
So
Sabbath. What's this Sabbath? Is what that was the rest day, wasn't it? Or like, oh no, Black Sabbath. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I'm really jesting. So
it's funny.
I was going to ask about what are your hopes now, and what are your, where do you want to take? Because actually we haven't. I'm remembering other bits I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you've got time to just talk a little bit about this. You talked, and I hope you don't mind if I mention this, but you talked in a previous interview about having OCD, and that being a challenge for you throughout your life. And I wonder whether that maybe the obsessive component of that is why you're the sort of person that might have jumped into, oh, I've got this new worldview, I want to find everything out about it, I'm really interested, like whether you've kind of like latched onto this and that gives you that added sense of excitement and drive at all. I don't know.
Probably. Probably a little bit. I think I'm not obsessing too much. Like it hasn't negatively affected me,
Mm,
thankfully. The OCD that affected me negatively was it was in ways that I couldn't manage. Um, but um, this has been a real positive thing in my life, being able to do these, these chats and interact online. And um yeah, but as far as the OCD, it was like, I don't know if you've heard of, I think it's, how do you say it, religious scrupulosity, is that how you say it?
yeah, so
Yeah.
I've edited a book on OCD
Okay.
by Caleb Black. In fact, with second edition is going to be coming out of that soon. But he is in a secular therapy project, actually. So
Okay.
he's
Oh,
a
okay.
non-religious. So Dr. Caleb Black, he's a bit of an expert on OCD, and part of his book on OCD was talking about the ritual of religious activities and certain things, and like,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, sorry.
So that basically my OCD was the constant need to confess all the time. And
Right.
so, like I mentioned earlier, if I had a bad thought, I felt like I had to confess everything, and the person I would confess to was my mom. And I kind of not kind of, but I exhausted her. But she never told me, "Okay, please stop telling me everything." She was always there and listened, and
Mm,
um, it was exhausting. We can talk now, and she would just, she had said, "Yes, it was very tiring, but you needed me to be there for you." And we didn't know what it was at that time, but I just felt like I had to tell everything, and I'd feel better for a time, but then the next thought would come, or I would avoid certain triggers, and triggers would depend on shows or movies, or even certain ways of driving home. I knew what to
mm.
avoid, and if I didn't if something did trigger it, I would get really hard on myself, like, why did you allow that to happen? And it really affected my day-to-day life. So but
That's what it's one of the so an argument that I think's not discussed or not used enough in counter apologetics is psychological conditions or psychological challenges. It's like
mhm,
if you're talking about omni God, right? So you've got an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, and it's designed humanity. Why would he design humanity to have like schizophrenia or
yeah,
any what I'm just picked that one, but any I mean, I've got a child, I've got twins. One of them's got is on the autistic spectrum, is autistic spectrum disorder, and it seems like he's got pathological demand avoidance. That's really challenging for me to parent him. It's really
mhm.
challenging, and you're thinking, why would you design a child or an adult or anyone to have
Yeah.
such fundamental challenges with navigating daily life. And
Mhm.
it's not like it's nothing to do with their belief in God or not. It's nothing to do with anything else other than they've got a psychological condition that's really
Mhm.
challenging, and you wouldn't want them to have otherwise. I'm not saying that's the case with
Yeah.
OCD. I'm not.
No, I
Do you know
know.
what I mean? But
Yeah, I
but
do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, it was not fun, and so, medication has has
Mm,
helped with that, and also, um, I think just leaving, the f Christianity has helped as well,
mm,
but I'm not saying that that's the cure for it.
no.
Medication has
Yeah.
definitely helped, for sure.
Mm,
So, yeah.
yeah. Oh, good. And
Yeah.
what are your hopes for the future going forward in terms of um where you see? I mean, you seem to be interested in the whole skeptical community and
Mhm,
being able to talk about these things and investigate these things with others and learn from others and
mhm.
interview others. So where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, well, so my mom and I are starting our channel. We have recorded we did record an episode last week, put it up, and then we're like, "No, this isn't us. We're being too stiff." So we re-recorded one. So we're gonna be putting that out soon.
Do it with a glass of
Getting our
wine.
own.
Just get a glass of wine
That's what we
and then do it.
said. That's what we said.
Do you ever get Graham Norton, like the TV, like
I
have
feel
you ever
like
heard
I've
of Graham
heard.
Norton?
I
He's
think I've
he's
heard of him.
he's quite a revered chat show host in the UK, and you can see
Okay.
him particularly on YouTube and whatnot. And he gets
Okay.
interviewed, like Seth Meyers had him on the other week, and Seth Meyers like, "You are the best interviewer. Like I look up to you." And he is an amazing interviewer. But he normally
Okay.
has multiple guests, and he has like
Okay.
5 guests on, and they all have a drink and they're all like bouncing off each other, and so it makes
Oh,
his life
fun.
really easy, and then
Yeah.
everything's really relaxed, everyone's had a drink, and these little things it does to make it really just operate really smoothly. So yeah,
Oh,
just
cool.
have a glass. I'm
Okay.
not advocating drinking, of course, I'm
Yeah.
not doing that.
It does help, though. It does help.
So
Yeah.
that's you and Stacey's mum. I just
Yes.
want to
It's
let's
empty right
have a look at
now.
this.
And,
So this
I'll
is
have it changed. Yes.
Yeah, so that is your placeholder for
It
your channel, which is above
yes.
Stacie.
Mhm.
And then I want can you see this? What I'm typing?
Oh, yeah.
And
This is awesome, by the way.
I just want to say, if people haven't heard of Postmodern Jukebox, this is a rabbit hole that you will spend weeks and weeks down. And if you like, people in the chat are liking their metal. About half of the songs these guys do are metal songs done in like either 40s,
Oh,
50s, 60s,
cool.
70s, or pop songs. They take a load of them and they do them in the style of whatever it is. So Stacey's mom, they've done in 1930s hot jazz, but they're absolutely brilliant. I saw them live recently, and they
Oh,
are
cool.
absolutely phenomenal. So go and lose yourself down in Postmodern Jukebox. It's got nothing to do with this Stacie, of course, but Stacie and her mum are you're going to do. That's really cool. So what are you going to talk
Yeah.
about then?
Deconversion, and we wanna have guests on, and we were brainstorming this week of some ideas, and we wanna do one show or one live show a week, and then one produced show, like, a week as well, just starting because I also have 3 boys,
Mm,
and I also do a show on Skeptic Haven once a week, so, um, we're
you're
kinda just
busy.
yeah. But we do wanna have our own little thing on the side
Do it.
because 'cause we've been talking about it for a year now, and, um, yeah, we aw, you got a super chat. That's so nice.
Ricky's just amazing. He's
Ricky's
such a decent.
awesome. Ricky is so great. That is so
I'm so
awesome.
happy for Stacey and her family. He says, after losing all our church friends, it's been nice finding friends in the atheist and deconstructing community.
I
And
agree.
that is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, this is there, there are communities for everyone, I guess, online, but it's I think there's a wonderful group. I mean, I've got to know people through my channel and through the
Mhm.
circles I mix with now. It's
Yeah.
just fantastic. Be nice one
Yeah.
day we all sat down and had a beer in the pub, but
I
I don't think
know. We
don't think
all
that's
live
going to happen.
so far.
It's just like the
Oh,
internet's amazing. Damn
I
the
know.
internet.
I
But
know. It's like, but at least we can come together. I feel like I've gotten to know so many people, which I have, but you really do feel connected by doing these, and that's also why I watch so many live shows is just to stay connected in the chats with people. And that there was about a month or so ago, I felt really just down one day, and I went on live shows, and I just was like, oh, all my friends are here. So it does
oh,
it
that's
helps.
brilliant.
Yeah. So I'm thankful for the internet.
Oh, fabulous. Well, is
Yeah.
there is there anything? Thank you very much, Ricky, by the way.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
yeah,
Ricky.
no, really appreciate that. And Parrot Andy earlier, fabulous. Thanks
Mhm.
for your support. So, is there anything you? Uh, oh, someone saying, is that someone that knows postmodern jukebox? Lucky Soul, they tour
Oh.
Europe a lot. They are brilliant, and they have the great thing about. I'm sorry, I'm going to wax lyrical about postmodern jukebox, but they have like a bunch of different singers who are all incredible singers. They get them off like a lot of the finalists from like Pop Idol or whatever it is,
Oh,
America's Got Talent or whatever. They'll take a number one. That's where Casey Abrams, the guy there who's at the front, he was from there, and who are so really good singers. And they get them and they rotate them even on stage. Like they'll have like different singers come on to do different songs, and it's compared by one of them, and it's just an experience. And they are
cool.
just incredible musicians. Anyway, that's postmodern jukebox, not you. Let's talk about
It's
you,
okay.
Stacie.
It's all
Um,
good.
is there anything else you wanted to say? Anything you want to add? Anything you haven't said about yourself
Oh,
and your
man.
experiences?
I think, you know, this was a really good interview. I really
Oh,
enjoyed
thank
my
you.
time with you a lot.
Oh, oh, thank
I
you.
feel like every time I talk, there's something that I remember, or I'll think of something in a new way, and I feel like this one you brought out a lot of different aspects that I don't think I've said before. So,
Oh,
thank you for just having me on, and I really enjoyed this. So, and getting to
brilliant.
know
Well,
you.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, you too, and you're welcome on whenever you want. I'm up
Aw.
for having chats about anything. In fact,
Yeah.
might do. It's interesting because Ricky's been on a couple of times, and
Oh,
actually,
cool.
I've had his son on. His son's an evolutionary biologist
Oh
who
my
teaches,
gosh.
and he's from a particular type of Christian sect, which is quite an unusual one, not very well
I
known.
gotta watch that.
And Ricky, and so I've had him and his son on, and had them on both on together. So I'm one day I want to have like 3 or 4 people on, and
Yeah,
just to have a bit of a chat and a bit of a mix of people. It'd be great. But anyway, that's just
that would
something to
be
think about. So
amazing. Yeah. I like
cool
doing
beans.
panels.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's fun.
There's not so much pressure. You can like leave
Mhm.
it to someone else to.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, look, I've had an absolutely wonderful time. Thank you so
Aw.
much to the people watching. Really
Yeah.
appreciate. Thanks to you, super chats, fabulous. And look out for apostasy. Do you get it? Uh,
Yeah.
l- watch out for content that's coming soon. I'm really interested to see the dynamic between you and your mum. What would be interesting is seeing that very first one. Uh, you should just go for it. Like it is what it is. But then
Yeah,
look back at where you are
that's
in
true.
like 2 years time, and then compare like,
That's
oh,
true. Okay, you're
yeah,
right.
great.
Awesome.
Okay, what are your very last words? What perhaps uh, advice to anyone who is starting down the road that you are already somewhat down?
Well, I'd say my advice, I've given this a few times, but someone new might not have heard it. My advice is to go outside of your religious community. Um, Look for information in different sources that you might not have found before. It's scary, but it's worth it. Don't don't go to your pastor. um, don't go to places where they'll reinforce that belief that you've been told before. And find things out on your own because it's not bad like they are like they've told you it will be. So find information out on your own and it'll be worth it.
I guess it's a case of saying, do you know what? When you pull that thread on your jumper that you've worn,
Mhm.
most of your life, it's a jumper that you're so used to putting on, and it's got that thread that's hanging down a bit. Don't be afraid to just pull it a bit more.
Yeah.
Just pull it more. If it all unravels and falls apart, don't stop yourself from pulling that thread. It'll be
Exactly.
worth it in the end.
It'll
Get
be
yourself
so
a new
worth it.
jumper. New jumper
Yeah.
would be much nicer,
Oh, yeah, it won't be all worn out and
or
you'll
something.
feel better. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks to everyone else. Take care of yourself,
Thank you.
Apostasy. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time here. And good night to one, good night to all. And just, of course, please check out. Sorry, this is my spamming time
Oh,
again.
you do
Um,
it.
so I got onto Amazon onto the Kindle, and in the top 20 books under atheism, not top
Mhm.
20 books, I've got my two latest books are like in there in the top 20. So please check them
Amazing.
out. That only means like you sold like 4 of them. So it's really not that amazing, but please check out Aliens and Religion, Where Two Worlds Collide, and a nice easy read that is jam packed full of really cool arguments. I love these. You might like this, Stacie. I'm spamming
Yeah.
you now. Uh,
Yes.
this is 30 arguments against the existence of God, heaven, hell, Satan, and divine design. So that's a real nice, easy to read, packed full of awesome arguments. So check those 2 books out, peeps. In the meantime,
Awesome.
love to all, and thank you, Stacie, again.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.